Hello again. The Museum of London, which is one of my favourite museums, is closing down for 3 or 4 years before it moves to a new site in Smithfield, opening in 2025 or 2026. Quite why it is necessary to close the present museum down years before the new one has been built is something of a mystery, but I think I have divined at least part of the reason. They are taking the opportunity to falsify history and hope that we do not notice what they are up to. Let me explain. When I visited today, there was a section of the museum giving us a foretaste of what they planned for the new Museum of London when it opened. There is currently an excellent display in the museum about Roman London, with accurate reconstructions of rooms in a house of that time. The problem is that all the visual reconstructions and pictures around the museum feature white people, and it's felt that something a little more inclusive will be needed when the museum moves. So instead of the arrangement there is in the museum now, where one can simply wander around the reconstruction of a Roman house in London and use one's imagination, there will in the new museum be giant video screens which will feature actors pretending to be the Roman owners of the home. Well, that's a bit annoying, but I suppose everything today has to have screens like that, and people simply cannot be expected to rely any more upon their imagination to fill in the blanks, as it were. What is truly bizarre and quite insane is the scenario which has been chosen for the Roman home in London, which the new museum will be putting together as a display. It will belong to a young single black mother with two mixed race children. Please don't laugh, I'm being perfectly serious. In the description to this video, I show a photograph which I took of the presentation which I watched today. There is a picture of a black woman dressed as a Roman, and the text reads as follows: Olpia is in her late 20s and the owner of the house and shop. She is of African descent. She is recently widowed. Her husband was a centurion before he retired. There is literally no evidence that any black person ever lived in Roman London. Nor do I mean to convey that this is a radical new interpretation of the evidence. I don't mean that the evidence for this idea is weak or debatable. There is no evidence for this idea at all. None. The whole thing is pure fantasy and has been invented to convey to people visiting the museum that there have always been young black single mothers living in London, even thousands of years ago. There is something quite terrifying about such lies, lies which nobody dared challenge or even question for fear of being thought to be racist. It is true that some skulls in Britain from the time of the Roman occupation have been examined using a system called Fordisc, which claims to be able to determine the ethnicity of skeletons based on the measurements of the skull, but this process is no better than guesswork. In the description to this video, I give a reference to a study and evaluation of the Fordisc program. Let me quote from the conclusion reached, which is that even in optimal circumstances, it is successful in only one case in 100 in divining the ethnicity of the skull. 200 skeletons of known ancestry were run through Fordisc under controlled conditions. I quote, "The results of the analyses suggest that Fordisc's utility in research and medico-legal contexts is limited. Fordisc will only return a correct ancestry attribution when an identified specimen is more or less complete and belongs to one of the populations represented in the program's reference samples. Even then, Fordisc can be expected to classify no more than 1% of specimens with confidence." In other words, this method is useless for finding the ethnicity of a skull. We know that this is true when it is applied to Roman skeletons in this country because it was used on the skull of the so-called Beachy Head woman, which was unearthed some years ago near the seaside town of Eastbourne on the south coast of England. It was confidently stated by historian David Olusoga, among others, that this was the skeleton of a black African woman. This claim is still all over the internet and in various books. If you try searching Beachy Head Woman, see what comes up, you'll soon find the claims that she was a black African. When a DNA sample was analysed, though, from the skeleton at the Crick Institute, it found that the person was actually from Europe, most likely Cyprus. No black African ancestry at all. Not a single case in this country has been found where DNA testing shows the presence of a single black African person in Roman times. All the claims relating to black people in Britain at that time are the result of measuring skulls, and this method is hopelessly unreliable. One DNA analysis showed that somebody had North African ancestry at that time, but this was Carthaginian. The Carthaginians were from Phoenicia in modern-day Lebanon. They were certainly not black. As I say, there is literally no evidence at all for the idea that black people lived in London during the Roman occupation of this country. Creating a scenario which involves a young black single mother with mixed-race children who is a successful businesswoman is done to reassure black people that they have always been an integral part of life in Britain. It is not true. I'm guessing that by the time that the new Museum of London opens in 3 or 4 years' time, the whole thing will be able to be presented as fact, and that most people like me will have either given up the struggle against the barrage of lies or gone completely mad under the strain of constantly correcting these misapprehensions and been carted off to the loony bin.